Well, time to put this lit degree to good use. Hi everyone, welcome to my critique of Bloodborne. Let's get this out of the way first. I'm not Vatavidia or the Ashen Hollow. I'm not an expert on widely accepted Bloodborne lore, despite having played the game and its DLC half a dozen times. But as the beauty of these games is down to the interpretation of the story, and the community has been so accepting of deep dives that don't necessarily agree with their own, I figured we'd look at why Bloodborne is political as
The internet demands video games always have a deep meaning or be politically charged and motivated, be socially conscious and socially aware of everything that's going on, and I think that's really detrimental to video games as a whole. It's no longer enough for a video game to just be fun.
Okay, for everyone who just clicked this, I'm going to save you about 10 minutes right now. This entire video is just me giving reasons why people need to shut the up about political agendas within the video game industry.
They're always the same. Keep your politics out of my games. Or, oh boy, another reviewer with an agenda. And you see this a lot with the gamer community. They'll bum-rush Ebert or any other respected figure and insist they take games seriously as art.
Do you think that the complaints about the game's lack of politics from the social justice crowd are blown, as usual, out of proportion? Or is there some actual merit to their complaints this time around?
Give me strength. Every single player game has a politics of its own. Every one. Yes, even that. Despite what basement dwellers on the internet would have you believe.
Why people need to shut the up about political agendas within the video game industry.
Yup, I heard you the first time. Sonic the Hedgehog? Oh, that game about the nature versus industry movement? Super Mario, blue-collar worker brainwashed into fighting on behalf of the monarchy. Halo, the ethics of militarization, and that's just 3 examples I pulled out my arse. It's not that I'm arguing Bloodborne is political.
I bet I could be political too.
But rather that its world has a politics. That's what we're going to explore here. A lot of this is interpretive, and that's where I've found a lot of my love for FromSoftware's game worlds lie. You could even argue that Bloodborne's politics align itself with anti-vaxxers and anti-maskers. I mean, just think about it. View the Great One's blood as analogous of coronavirus.
The recent outbreak of a novel coronavirus, now called COVID-19, has left many of us worried and paranoid about our own health, as well as interacting with other people and carrying out everyday tasks, such as travelling on public transport.
And the Healing Church as our government's attempts to downplay the virus with outright lies.
We're going to turn now to the White House, where President Trump announced that Kodak will help produce COVID pharmaceuticals as he defied the FDA and his science advisors by touting hydroxychloroquine and defending his promotion of a video that spread COVID misinformation.
But that's not what my focus is going to be. Every story is informed by the creator's personal politics, and as Miyazaki has gone on record as having very profound political beliefs, it's easy to see them in every strand of Bloodborne's world, never mind how problematic the game's primary influence, H.P Lovecraft, is when examined with a modern lens. There's already an amazing take by Jim Sterling, which I'll link below, which looks at Dark Souls, and honestly, at first, I was going to explore his interpretation in detail for this video, but he makes the argument well enough. Here, I'm going to discuss why Bloodborne is all about eat the rich and kill God. You've probably seen the meme flying around on Fox News while the BLM movement continues to make waves across the globe, and believe it or not, it didn't come from Aerosmith, though that is a great song. The concept originally appeared back in the 18th century. Jean-Jacques Rousseau claimed, "When the poor have nothing more to eat, they will eat the rich." And it's become a bit of a rallying cry for Generation Z socialism.
This regime will take careful note of every individual within the society. Then, at the end of each year, the richest 1% will be summarily executed in front of the people. Then, their wealth will be redistributed equally amongst the populace. Now sure, the 1% will probably try to find loopholes around this, but what they have to keep in mind is that the rest of the rich people are also trying to find those same loopholes. So at the end of the day, the top 1% is still getting called. Nobody will know exactly how rich everybody else is, only the state who's keeping track of it. So the rich will just have to guess how much money they need to get rid of in order to get out of the 1%.
I mean, J-Reg's video is satirical, but some people actually think this is what socialism is. It's brilliant. Whilst the phrase "eat the rich and kill God" is hilarious, the core meaning of the meme is still pretty important for all of us. Eat the rich, a simple statement which covers the widening wealth gap in first world countries. And kill God, looking at particular governmental bodies who incite religious doctrine to excuse their authoritarian actions.
And weaponizing and abusing scripture to justify bigotry. White supremacists have done it. Those who justified slavery did it. Those who fought against integration did it. And we're seeing it today.
This isn't anything new, but we've seen political discourse begin to look inwards rather than outwards, noticing the problems we have at home more and more. From Occupy Wall Street right through to what happened in Portland and beyond, activism against a corrupt elite has grown and grown, to the point where, honestly, I think 2020 is going to be a turning point for these movements. And I think Bloodborne encapsulates it. No, wait, don't click away yet! So a brief summary of Bloodborne's world. Once upon a time, there was an ancient civilization, made up of the Pthumerians, humanoids, and the Great Ones, godlike beings, each truly unique. Some Pthumerians started to give birth to children of the Great Ones, and drank their blood. They fell to the plague of beasts, and they faded away from the world. The Great Ones also faded into the background and slumbered, believed to have abandoned us. Years, possibly centuries later, humans appeared and established the School of Byrgenwerth, scholars who wanted to study the history of Yharnam and the Great Ones. The leader of this school, Master Willem, a curious guy who wanted to envelope himself in knowledge of the Great Ones, led an expedition where they found the blood of these godlike beings and brought it back to Yharnam. He just wanted to study the blood, but his pal, Master Laurence, this guy, wanted to ingest the blood. He and Willem had a big falling out, and ultimately Laurence left, establishing the Healing Church. He started to use the Healing Church to sell blood to the population, and it became as important to Yharnam as currency. People became addicted to the blood, and they would trade goods and services for it, no longer using it for healing, but instead for pleasure. As time went on, the blood turned the people of Yharnam into beasts. The Healing Church lied to the people of Yharnam. Even as Laurence himself began to fall into beasthood, they claimed that the blood wasn't the cause of the beast plague, but the cure for it. The people listened. They took more blood. The richest, who could afford it, did exactly that, and while the poor, who had already taken too much of the blood through healing, starved while they transformed under the moon. Secretly, the Healing Church established the Hunters, whose job it was to slay the transformed beasts. In some cases, they would even slay suspects before they transformed, killing some innocent people in the process. Our character, a foreigner to Yharnam, awakes tied to a hospital bed in Yosefka's clinic. A leering, crusty old-timer cranes his neck over to us and states,
"Oh, yeah. Pale blood. Well, you've come to the right place."
And so our story begins. Before we fully begin, we need to discuss H.P Lovecraft. Everybody knows that Bloodborne embodies Lovecraftian horror. In fact, among YouTubers who have discussed the game, I've noticed a trend.
But for as much Dracula and Van Helsing there is in there, the second half goes full Lovecraft.
Lovecraft.
How it's based on Lovecraftian horror.
I swear, it took me longer than I care to admit to edit those 5 seconds, and the only thing that kept me going was Mez's voice, just mwah. But people say Lovecraftian when discussing this game almost as much as they say blood, and this video will be no exception. The only YouTuber I've seen, however, truly discuss his politics in relation to the game is Super Bunny Hop. It's a great video, and I'll link it below if you're interested, but just so that we're all on the same page, let's define Lovecraftian. Lovecraftian horror is cosmic horror, the type of horror which the human mind can barely comprehend. The most famous example of this is Cthulhu, which once was a culmination of our greatest fears and nightmares brought to life, and now is a plushie. A more modern reference point would be the incredible podcast The Magnus Archives, which I'm unashamedly plugging here because it's insidiously clever. Often in Lovecraft stories, the protagonist is ill-equipped for the situations he finds himself in, and is driven to madness by the end of the story. The monsters don't have human needs. In fact, it would be impossible for us to even understand what they want. Any modern discussion of Lovecraft is of course also coloured by his anti-Semitism, but he carried a lot of other political views which aren't commented on nearly as much. And yes, I am firmly in the camp of death of the author with his work, but Lovecraft's political views at the time do not diminish the effectiveness of his horror, but it's still interesting to explore. He was, at least in his earlier career, a white supremacist, an upperclassman, and looked like Jacob Rees-Mogg.
That's a wee UK joke for all you international listeners.
But seriously, would you want to have a drink with either of these guys? One looks like a rubber skeleton and the other a depressed piece of string. Where was I? Oh, yeah, okay, Lovecraft. So, as the years went on, a terrible investment led to him needing to move into a small apartment with his mother, relatively penniless. He resented being poor, but refused to accept that this made him working class, which we can see in his piece, The Horror at Red Hook. In this story, he writes, "The soul of the beast is omnipresent and triumphant, and Red Hook's legions of blear-eyed, pock-marked youths still chant and curse and howl as they file from abyss to abyss. None knows whence or whither, pushed on by blind laws of biology which they may never understand. As of old, more people enter Red Hook than leave it on the landward side, and there are already rumours of new canals running underground to certain centres of traffic and liquor and less mentionable things." There was actually a really strange, obsessive hatred in much of his work toward the slum-like areas of Red Hook. He didn't highlight the injustice of the poor housing or the struggles of the people there. He thought, much like a working-class Tory or Republican voter, that poverty was caused by immigrants, or just something people brought on themselves. Okay, so now, 13 or so minutes in, we can finally get on to Bloodborne, a game based on, and which arguably subverts, the horror and political philosophy of a racist, classist, white supremacist incel. We awake in Yosefka's clinic, strapped to a bed as a leering old man injects us with Yharnam blood, this mass-produced god blood which the Healing Church sold to the masses. Cautiously making our way down the stairs, we run into our first of Bloodborne's monsters, a run-of-the-mill werewolf just having a nom. It's ingenious of Miyazaki to present a werewolf to us as our first monster, because a werewolf is standard horror. We've seen werewolves before. We have a clear idea in our mind's eye of what werewolves are all about. We can comprehend a werewolf. It eases us into Bloodborne's eldritch horror by dipping our toe with a B-movie monster. And then we die. Which does give me a good opportunity to rewind slightly and talk about our character creation. Bloodborne, despite carrying similar mechanics to Dark Souls, is thematically different in its story. In Dark Souls 1, for example, you are the chosen undead, and the game never, ever lets you forget it.
Thou who art undead art chosen.
Chosen undead, who has rung the bell of awakening. Chosen undead. Your fate is to succeed the great Lord Gwyn.
The true Lord of Men, the Dark Lord.
Despite just being a random prisoner, you are ultimately embodying the Chosen One archetype. It doesn't matter who you choose in the second half of the game. You're either locked under the thumb of Kingseeker Frampt or Darkstalker Kath. Which is great, I love that. But it is important to highlight that they're literally seeking for someone to replace Gwyn as the king of this world. In Bloodborne, you're just some guy. You're travelling about, you enter Yharnam, and suddenly you're injected with the beastly blood which locks you there, just like the rest of the population. You're not off on some sacred journey to replace Yharnam's ruler, because the bourgeoisie, the ruling class, has already destroyed itself. All that's left are the gods, the people, and the monsters. This idea of you just being a random person lost in a world that doesn't care about your existence is made clear during the character creation screen. In Dark Souls, you can pick your class and it will change your starting equipment. Your material possessions can be, arguably, better or worse depending on which class you want to start with. The footage you're seeing is from Game Grumps' playthrough of Dark Souls 3, and just listen to what Aaron says when he's playing around with the Pyromancer build.
Love being a Pyromancer, it's like my fave.
Obviously.
In Dark Souls, it's possible to have a favourite class because of the stark differences in starting gear and abilities. In essence, your character can embody an upperclassman with a badass sword and shield, or a poverty-stricken civilian just trying to find his way. If you're a scrub, you'll go for the knight because the guy on the cover looks cool. If you're a Chad, you'll go for deprived and roar at enemies until they just run away from you. In Bloodborne, every player starts off with the same gear, no matter what class you pick. The same outfit, even. Sure, you can change your starter weapons, but the look and design of the character is just an everyman. Lore-wise, this is because Gehrman, the first hunter, popularized wearing everyday clothes for speed, but thematically, Bloodborne does this to highlight one simple idea. You are just like everybody else, every other player. There's nothing special about your status in this world. You're not a chosen one. You're a member of the masses. Now rise up, eat the rich, and kill God. However, despite just being some guy, the people of Yharnam can immediately tell that you are an outsider, and they curse you for it. Just like in your local town, being a foreigner or an immigrant makes you a potential threat to some. You're only 5 minutes into Yharnam before a local tells you to piss off.
What's this two-bit nonsense you're peddling? I heard you told that wench about some shelter. Well, she's a damn fool to trust an outsider. Why? Well, her sort's probably just fixing to feed some of your coin. Alright, what crafty lies does the outsider have today?
Often in Lovecraft stories, the outsider is an upper-class intellectual who comes to a small, strange town full of others, people of other races or creeds. Think of Professor Dyer in At the Mountains of Madness, where he sees his entire expedition team slaughtered and dissected, and thinks to himself, that's fascinating, before pursuing the monster into an ancient civilization. The difference with Bloodborne is we're not dealing with a small section of a strange society. Everyone in Yharnam is all aboard the blood train. I've seen descriptions in the past of Yharnam being under the thumb of a theocracy, but I find that to be quite a simple examination of the Healing Church's role in Bloodborne's world. There's nothing particularly religious about the church. It's a church in name only. We don't see the official doctrine written down as we work our way through the world, just scraps of scholarly information. The people of Yharnam rely on and serve the church, not the Great Ones. I would go so far as to say that Willem's school, Byrgenwerth, has more religious dogma tied to it with the rituals that it studies and partakes in than the church ever did. The Healing Church is authoritarian, elitist, and somewhat capitalist in its government over the civilization. Everyone follows the rule, but they haven't had the why explained to them. It's just a part of life here, and it destroyed itself. With that in mind, it's time to get into specifics.
Blood. Oh, it seems to me it's enough to make a man sick. Too proud to show your true face, eh? A sporting was.
Yeah, so by now we've made it to Father Gascoigne. Yay! For a lot of players, this will be the moment where they either fall firmly in love with what Bloodborne has to offer, or they'll put it down after Gascoigne's transformation just whoops their ass. Lucky for us, Gascoigne offers a fascinating insight into the Healing Church's ruthless hold on the people of Yharnam. The Healing Church had different sects. Two stark examples would be the Black Sect and the White Sect. Gascoigne is a member of the former. Tonight is the hunt, and he's out for blood. Listen to what he says to us when we enter his arena.
Beasts all over the shop. You'll be one of them, sooner or later.
Gascoigne is a prime example of the role the hunters played in Yharnam's politics. The wiki reads, Gascoigne was a priest in a foreign land, where he earned the title of Father. At some point in his life, Gascoigne travelled to Yharnam and eventually joined the Healing Church as a hunter. He works for the Healing Church and is part of the Black Hat Hunters. We'll come across many of these sly monsters over the course of the game, and they often form some of the game's most difficult fights. What makes them so deadly to the people of Yharnam, however, is they don't care if we're beastly yet. They don't look for evidence. They don't speak to us before smearing our faces into the Gothic concrete. They are under direct orders from Yharnam's governing body, the Church, to stamp out anyone who spreads dissent. Gascoigne, when we enter his arena, immediately assumes that we are beast-like just because we're an outsider, and we've had some of the Great One's blood injected into us. This is analogous with a Gestapo-esque secret police. Anyone who isn't one of them is the enemy. The people of Yharnam are subjugated by the Healing Church through the threat of the Hunters, despite them foolishly injecting this pandemic into the people of Yharnam. The moment when the fight takes a turn for the worst, Gascoigne's transformation, is effective in how it barks at the player, "Get ready! Bosses have stages in this game!" I confess that I didn't know about the power of the music box until I looked up a guide, frothing at the mouth on my first playthrough, but it's an excellent secret for those clever enough to fully engage with the item descriptions. I am a little disappointed that we didn't get anything like this again later in the game though. I bloody love secret items that give you an advantage over particular bosses. It's a pet love of mine. Thematically, his transformation isn't just here to highlight a disturbing twist to an already tough fight though. It's also here to highlight the hypocrisy of the Healing Church and the Hunters. Gascoigne accuses us of being a beast, despite literally losing himself to the beast plague. But with him gone, it's time to move on to... So, enough about the corrupt elite and their secret police. We just took out one of their generals. Let's head through to Cathedral Ward, our main hub area where we can collect NPCs like some kind of spooky Pokemon. The Odin Chapel dweller greets us and points out that we can use Cathedral Ward as a safe haven for those seeking refuge from the hunt. So, we embark on a quest to tell all those kind souls who told us to bugger off earlier that there's a refugee camp just up the road that they can hide in. Let's count them down. Behind door number 1, we've got crusty on the outside, gooey on the inside. This lonely old boomer clearly hates hunters, but is relying on us for a place to hide out. It takes a while for her to check her attitude, but eventually becomes quite useful to us by passing on sedatives that keep frenzy at bay. Just like your racist gran, she notably blames us all for Yharnam's troubles, just because we're an outsider. Presumably, drinking up the lies fed to her by the Healing Church. Sound familiar? Door number 2 has no help whatsoever. This guy's quirky as all hell. He goes to the opposite place you send him. And honestly, I constantly regret sending him to Odin Chapel. As a rule of thumb, we should do the opposite of anything he advises. Perhaps it's better to tell him to stuff it and send him to Yosefka's clinic so he can be experimented on instead. Door number 3 has the only NPC worth rescuing. This Lady of the Night is fascinating. She's distrusting of men as a Lady of the Night, but settles right next to our lamp and gives us useful stamina-boosting blood. It's widely theorized that she has a history linking back to Cainhurst Castle. We'll come back to her later. Number 4, it's secretly just the worst. Sister Adela is found in the Hybogian jail after being snatched up by the, well, Snatcher. She's meek and shy at first, but as the blood moon descends, she can turn positively psychotic. She's dedicated to the healing church in more ways than one, refusing to trust you unless you're wearing the black church set. She's also a blood saint, the church's means of mass-producing the beast blood. What a catch. And finally, door number 5, leaving the best till last, we have killed all your friends. Okay, this asshole. Jokes aside, sending him to Odin Chapel is the biggest mistake you can make in the game. He's secretly just a big old beast. By sending him to the chapel, you're dooming any companions who reside here. When we turn our blade on him, he transforms into a really tough fight, spouting off as he mashes us up. However, listening to his dialogue, he's kinda got a good point.
Die! Hunters are killers! You call me a beast? A beast? What would you know? I didn't ask for this.
This small collection of friends aren't here to sell you things like the Firelink Shrine NPCs were. They're just hiding out. You have very little direct control over what these characters will do. In typical FromSoftware fashion, there aren't any signposted consequences for your actions. In my first playthrough, when I returned to the ward to see that Adela had attacked Ariana, I had no idea why, and she wouldn't even comment on the attack. But I know what you've done, Adela. I don't understand how anyone can look at Cathedral Ward with its well-lit, comforting refugee camp slotted between the game's starting area and the gruesome nightmare that awaits, and not see these eat-the-rich politics stamped clearly into the story it's crafting. But, okay, if I haven't convinced you yet, just wait till you see where we're going next. Oh, blood-starved beast, you suck! If his speed isn't enough to make you nervous when first entering his arena, his poisonous spray halfway through the fight will be enough to make you toss your controller through the TV. Seriously, he gave me so much trouble on my first time through that I rage quit the game and left it for a week before picking the controller back up. When I learned that you can throw pungent blood cocktails to distract it, my world changed, and I saw the creature in a new light. By the time you reach this monstrosity, you've worked your way through werewolves, old Yharnam, and its guard, the hunter, Jura, who's kind enough to give us a warning before reducing us to paste.
You there! Hunter! Didn't you see the warning? Turn back at once. Old Yharnam, burned and abandoned by men, is now home only to beasts. They are of no harm to those above. Turn back, for the hunter will face the hunt.
Wank. Good guy. Wank.
Good guy Jura is always the character I regret most killing. He renounced his vows as a hunter and he now protects the beasts which aimlessly roam old Yharnam, terrified of flame because the healing church set fire to the town in an effort to contain the spread of the beast. We arrive at the blood-starved beast's prison, appropriately an old church, battered and bruised before this lunatic ravages us. But why does such a loreless boss illustrate my point? Why am I talking about this monster and not, say, Amygdala? Well, Old Yharnam was already a poverty-stricken area prior to it being burned down. Once you partake of the blood, it was widely believed that the only thing which can keep beasthood at bay was either antidotes to minimise the poisonous side effects, or, you guessed it, more blood. This is why the blood-starved beast is so monstrous. Blood became the economy of Yharnam. It was ingrained in every facet of Yharnam's culture, but the blood-starved beast, prior to his or her transformation, was simply too poor to afford the blood, so he took what he could get. From the poisoned, rancid river flowing down from the research hall. There's a really interesting theory going around Reddit by user Last Protagonist about what happened to old Yharnam prior to its burning, and any rewriting of the theory would just feel cheap, so I'm just going to read it here. It reads, "Let's look at the experiments going on within the research hall, and more specifically the pool of poisonous water at the base of it. If the Healing Church of the Waking World were to be conducting experiments, if it were to dump runoff water or other liquids, they would naturally flow down to the lowest point of Yharnam. That is, towards old Yharnam. Whether it was neglect or intentionally done, the people of old Yharnam started to become sick, and the cure to that sickness was delivered via blood ministration. This would have been a huge boon to the credibility of the church, and proof to the miraculous nature of the blood and the overall good fortune of Yharnam. It's why, as we move our way deeper through the slums of old Yharnam, we see more and more werewolves, later stage beasts, and shabby, cloak-wearing, poison-spreading, miniature versions of the blood-starved beast. The Healing Church, looking down from their grand castles and cathedrals, watched Yharnam's people starve, losing themselves to addiction and turning into beasts, and thought, "You got mine," and burned the town to the ground, believing this would solve the problem. Even the architecture leading up to the beast reinforces this. We wade through a sea of statues of the people, all looking up, facing in the direction of their rich masters. And speaking of architecture, Bloodborne's architecture makes you feel small and insignificant. We are dwarfed the entire game. The buildings are towering monstrosities, the coaches and wagons which litter the town seem just too large, and the further we progress into the game, the larger the enemies become. We have constant reminders around every corner of how grandiose this world is and how small and normal we are when faced against these insurmountable odds. We can divide the level design of Bloodborne into three camps. First, we have the grand medieval style castles and cathedrals which make up the Healing Church, Castle Cainhurst, Byrgenwerth, and the lecture halls. Second, we have the industrial townhouses and slums where Bloodborne's population resides within Yharnam. And third, we have the outer countryside, Hemwick Village and the Forbidden Woods, which we're working through now, where peasants and the poor live off of the land and are exploited by Micolash's School of Menzies. Working your way through Yharnam immediately highlights the polarity between the rich and the poor in Yharnam. The Healing Church, the corrupt, rich, governing body of Yharnam, reside in these great, grand buildings representative of the old world and medieval culture. The industrialization of Yharnam, an attempt to kill the old world, aligns with the progression of capitalism in the destruction of our Yharnam's society. Think of the symbolism we see of carriages lying in the streets, untouched by the plague, alongside dead, rotting bodies of horses, the natural world. It's far easier to get yourself lost in Bloodborne than in the other Souls games too, because From have purposefully made the structure of this world as overcrowded and maze-like as possible. Yharnam's buildings clutter each other, built together in a mesh-like heap to both symbolise the insanity of Lovecraftian horror, but also to show us how over-commercialised Yharnam society is. This is complemented with the many gravestones and coffins littering the world. Yharnam was overcrowded, overpopulated, over-industrialised much too quickly, and as a result, the Blood Plague spread way too easily. To the point where hastily dug graves had to be crammed into every corner because they were running out of places to dump the bodies. But the greatest piece of symbolism we see is actually in the statues and how they evolve. They litter Yharnam streets. Early on, we see these stone figures twisted into forms of servitude, looking up, often directed towards the grand castles and cathedrals of the Healing Church. We are constantly reminded of the subjugation of Yharnam's working class, and this symbolism receives another layer once the illusion of Yharnam is lifted and we see the statue's original forms. Creatures preceding humans in similar servant-like poses. Okay, with that caveat handled, let's jump straight into... Believe it or not, Provost William's Mansion of Learning highlights much of the class divide we've already seen while hacking through Yharnam. While exploring Cathedral Ward, we come across this locked door. An ominous voice creaks through, asking us for the password.
The password.
Currently, we can't get access. In order to get to Byrgenwerth, we're going to have to jump through countless hoops. Let's see. We've got... Step 1. Slaying Vicar Amelia. We chop her up into little bits, touch Laurence's skull, and see the most important moment of Laurence and Willem's relationship, their parting of ways, before we receive the password and move on. Step 2. Taking the password, fear the old blood to the door. As it creaks open, we're met with an old corpse sitting calmly in a chair. Examining the corpse gives us this minor sentence. Already dead. Spooky. Step 3 has us entering the Forbidden Woods. This is easily my least favourite part of Bloodborne. It's an excellent area, don't get me wrong, but the oppressive darkness, the creaking of the trees, the rustle of the wind, and our inability to see the night sky always sets my teeth on edge. It's littered with traps, mob enemies, and dead ends. It's too easy to get lost here with its maze-like structure. Step 4, fighting our first tough enemies of the game. It's in the Forbidden Forest's second half we meet our first challenge among regular enemies. We see the evolution of the common folk, the old blood and the influence of Elitest, transforming them into snake-like parasites. It's reminiscent of that moment in Resident Evil 4, and both still give me goosebumps. They can take a beating, spit poison at you, and, worst of all, they have a really long reach. Step 5. Dealing with the fact that the Forbidden Woods only has one lamp. Whilst we can unlock a couple of shortcuts, even the old wooden lifts give us quite a long boss run to the Shadow of Yharnam, working through 2 monstrous pigs, snake parasites, and, if you take a wrong turn, celestial emissaries. Part 6. Dealing with the Shadow of Yharnam's boss fight. Okay, so at first I hated the Shadow of Yharnam, and then I defeated the Abyss Watchers in Dark Souls 3, which clearly takes a lot of influence from the Shadow's design. And on consecutive playthroughs, these guys have become a bit of a joke, but the first time you take them on, it throws everything out of balance. We're expecting a gigantic snake as our boss, but instead we have 3 dark hunters just waiting for us. They're fast, and if you follow your immediate instinct to take out the Pyromancer first and ignore the other 2, guess what? You've earned yourself a cheeky wee evolution for your remaining 2 foes. I love this boss fight. It epitomizes everything that Bloodborne mechanically gets right. The speed, the ferocity of the battle, handling numerous enemies at once. It's excellent. Gushing aside, regardless of how strong the boss fight is, we've had to push our way through one hell of an obstacle course before we reach Byrgenwerth, so whatever the Shadow of Yharnam is guarding must be something important. As we emerge from the Forbidden Woods and see the full moon glaring down at us, watching our every step with curious interest, we take in the grandiose building sitting lakeside. Climbing our way to the top, we find Master Willem sitting on the balcony. He's old, bloated, blind, and adorned with expensive embroidered clothing, and looking out over the lake, he's searching for Rom. When we met Alfred earlier, he said,
"Oh, good to see you safe. Now, let's think up something to discuss. Just tell me what piques your interest." Byrgenwerth is an old place of learning, and the Tomb of the Gods, carved out below Yharnam, should be familiar to every hunter. Well, once a group of young Byrgenwerth scholars discovered a holy medium deep within the tomb. This led to the founding of the Healing Church and the establishment of blood healing. In this sense, everything sacred in Yharnam can be traced back to Byrgenwerth. But today, the college lies deep within a tangled wood, abandoned and decrepit. And furthermore, the Healing Church has declared Byrgenwerth forbidden ground. It's unclear how many of its scholars remain alive, but only they know the password that allows passage through the gate.
Now, Alfred isn't necessarily a reliable narrator. Just like other common folk, he hasn't been privy to all of the Healing Church's secrets. He's a member of the Executioners, the Healing Church's secret militia. But he also drinks up the lies and propaganda which was fed to him by Laurence and his cronies. If there's one thing we've had to come to terms with in the past 4 years, it's to judge the liars, not those being lied to.
For this country, and the politicians who were campaigning to leave
just told us lies. And unfortunately, too many people believed them.
The Healing Church locked Byrgenwerth away, fearing that the people of Yharnam would learn the truth about the Great Ones and the Old Blood. In an effort to cover their tracks from the common folk, Willem and Laurence agreed to lock the door, keeping the plebs at the gate, and used this knowledge to keep the secrets of the upper echelon, the common folk, be damned. Byrgenwerth even translates to knowledge buried, surrounded by water. It doesn't get much clearer than that. When we find him, Willem doesn't even see us, a common outsider worth speaking to. He simply gestures to the lake and makes a gurgling, lazy sound. This was a conscientious decision, as there's cut dialogue and a boss fight uncovered by Lance McDonald's channel, which, again, I will link below. It's such a shame this boss fight was cut, but as a rule, I always kill him anyway. That'll teach you for not sharing your knowledge, you old fart. It's okay though, because we're about to jump into the lake to face off against the vacuous Rom. Rom's name reinforces this motif of hiding knowledge. We're told that Rom hides all manner of rituals. She has much to share with us, but she's vacuous, and in her current form, she can't share her insights. Rom's a really interesting boss fight. She's the first explicitly strange boss we've come across. Up until now, we've slain hairy beasts and poisonous beasts and this sorry excuse for a boss fight. Yeah, you heard me, you suck, Witch of Henwick! With Rom, as we run along the water of a lake with no end, we get the sense that this creature isn't like the others. The sharp, choir-like theme which plays reminds us of this. It's often a particular pet peeve of mine when a boss spawns regular enemies to fight us though, but spiders which guard her are so unique in their cute little dive bomb attacks, I don't mind too much. Yeah, good for you, buddy. It's okay though, because slaying her will help us learn the secrets Byrgenwerth and the Healing Church hid from the plebs behind that password-locked gate. The Great Ones did not abandon this world. They're still here, reawoken by Willem and Laurence's meddling in the tombs below. Okay, so we've reawoken in the past? The dream world? For now, oh my god, what is that? Let's just get hacking while we talk about the game's economy. By the time we start the game, on the night of the hunt, blood has become the currency of the world. Unlike Dark Souls, where we use souls to buy things and level up, a more mystical and ethereal currency, Bloodborne uses the physical, tangible material of blood. Take Ariana for example. She feels indebted to us for finding her a safe place by sending her to Cathedral Ward. She offers to pay us in blood.
Oh, hello dear. You weren't lying. This is a safe place. Thank you. I am in your debt. I'd like to tender my thanks, but I can't imagine what to offer. All I can give is my blood. But would you even take a whore's blood? Oh, good. Come close, dear. Don't worry, I've done this before.
Hell, what about leveling up your characters? It's a gruesome piece of capitalist imagery, using the blood of others to better yourself as you progress through the story. Consider the shining coins you find through the game. The description on the wiki reads, various coins that are particularly luminous. There are very few uses for spare change during the hunt, but these will serve as guides through the darkness. Or, one could save them until morning, if it ever comes. Gotcha! When I saw this description of shining coins for the first time, I was reminded of an old fable about Germany's Great Depression. The story goes that money was so worthless during this time that a man approached a grocery store with a wheelbarrow full of money, intending to buy some bread. The value of money was changing by the hour, so he just poured everything he had into the bucket and marched on down. The wheelbarrow couldn't fit into the store, so he left it outside and went in to ask how much a loaf of bread was that day. When he emerged, the money was still there, but the wheelbarrow was gone. On the night of the hunt, money is worthless. Blood is our only means of purchasing items. Yharnam's people want nothing to do with your frivolous, worthless metal. And even then, be honest, by the end of the game, echoes mean less to you than they did when you first began. Our first fight with the cleric beast was so tense because we have this upgrade currency and could lose it against this stupendous beast before we've even had a chance to see what it can do. In Yharnam, you claw and scrape, but by the time you reach Murgo's loft, your greatest frustrations from dying isn't how many souls you lost, but your progress to the next lamp. Capitalism. The more money you have, the less it's worth to you. On the flip side, we have blood vials. Bloodborne's healing mechanics are ingenious in how different they are to Dark Souls. Unlike Estus flasks, blood vials don't respawn when you rest at a lamp or return from death. Even though enemies like the brick troll drop them after being killed, they're not exactly a plentiful resource, which increases their value. How many times did you have to buy blood vials from the messengers before attempting a boss? Or return to the starting area to farm them just so your numbers are high enough to comfortably face off against the game's next ghoulie? If blood is the world's currency, it doesn't matter how powerful we are, we always need more, feeding into this motif of capitalist addiction. Anyway, back to the story. We've been journeying through Yahar'Gul for a while now, so let's talk about the abstract design that permeates this level. There are two huge reveals about Bloodborne's politics here. The first is the Great Ones. Their secret existence has been hidden from us by the Healing Church. The second is the lengths our powers that be went to in their quest for godlike power that was only reserved for them. The architecture of this level has horrifying imagery. Subjugated frozen bodies are merged into the walls, desperately reaching up to those above, both adding to the dreamlike aesthetic and also highlighting this melding of bodies that we're now slashing through. The statues have changed from their previous human forms, and instead are now horribly transformed to resemble the lesser amygdalans that we see towering above. As we enter the area above the Hypogean jail, the most terrifying part of this level comes into view. What should be a comforting, dim, blue lamplight has been cut. We've just been through hell to get here, charging past respawning enemies, amygdalans spewing laser beams at us, and it's quite a run between the last lamp and this one. What bastard did this? Looming over the lamp, we see an ominous statue of a Great One on a throne, with statues of human-eyed slaves either side. However, our assumption that perhaps the lamp was just severed by the dream world's existence is dashed when we look down. A claw-handed hunter waits patiently below. We've fallen into their trap. The enemy designs of this area are the most grotesque yet. Crooked body parts and skeletal forms are fused together into the undead amalgams, which are quick, sound absolutely hideous, and spit blood at you for powerful damage. We also have the so-called patchwork werewolves patrolling the rooftops above and the jail below, which is great preparation for the One Reborn, the boss of this area. Getting behind both of these enemies makes relatively quick work of them, but their design does stand out to me. Both enemies are homogenized designs, taking body parts from different creatures. I find this reinforces the theory that factions of the Healing Church, most likely the School of Menzies, tried to fuse together creatures in an effort to recreate a Great One. What we're battling in the streets below are these failed experiments by the Healing Church on the common people, taking their corruption to a whole new level. Unfortunately for us though, they seem to succeed. One Reborn isn't a particularly interesting boss, but I'd argue that it's by far the most disgusting. I mean, look at this guy. Mechanically, it reminds me of the Tower Knight fight from Demon Souls, flanking us on either side of those irritating bell-ringing women, much like the archers from that game. The wiki reads, "The One Reborn seems to be the final, presumably failed result of an unholy experiment made in Yahar'Gul with the intention of ascending humankind to the status of the Great Ones. And were the proletariat asked to participate in this experiment? Hell no, the common folk weren't even allowed to read up on the work being done at Byrgenwerth. This power was reserved for the elite class. Instead, they were presumably nabbed by the Snatcher against their will before being torn to shreds and mangled into this monstrosity. Its cries are presumably from pain. We've eaten the blood of the rich, and now we've even killed a failed attempt to create God. Its job is presumably to protect the School of Menzies from us, because we're coming. Putting the One Reborn out of its misery, we ascend the staircase to find the mummified corpse of Micolash, dead in his chair, wearing the cage of Menzies. If you're not privy to much of Bloodborne's lore, a lot of the words I just said might have sounded like gibberish. Micolash was a student of Byrgenwerth, who abandoned Master Willem with Laurence to help found the Healing Church, but Micolash didn't give a damn about the Great One's blood. He was more interested in ascending to godhood himself. He is who's responsible for these horrific experiments we've just cleaved through, and he's hiding in the Nightmare Realm, a plane of existence stuck between the real world and the world of the Great Ones. For the sake of our argument, just think of Micolash as a Mike Pence to Lawrence's Donald Trump, or, if you're in the UK, Michael Gove to Boris Johnson, just more intelligent than all four combined. Interacting with Micolash's corpse brings us into the lecture building of the School of Menzies. We find these slimy, slug-like creatures comically donning graduation caps, presumably students of the school. It isn't lost on me that the lecture building has one of the best farming areas in the game too, easy to kill, often dropping blood vials and bullets, and there's a lamp to respawn literally next door. Slicing through secret society Harvard uni dropouts has never felt so satisfying. It also, hopefully, shouldn't be lost on careful observers that it's in this lecture building we learn some more crucial details about what the hell is even going on. Further crucial knowledge is locked in a building, shrouded in darkness, within the consciousness of a madman, filled to the brim with slimy, slithering excuses for what once passed as humans. It's also no surprise that it's here that FromSoftware decided to drop our old friend Patches scuttling about in the form of a spider.
Oh, this cannot be. You cannot be. No, you didn't. Lord Amygdala? Oh, how did this come to pass? Now, wait just a moment. Do you think ill of me? Me? Oh, it pains me to hear it. You've made yourself a misreckoning. I shared with you a thing most secret. Now, you're witness to a miracle, and all the stronger for it. It's plain as a pikestaff. Now, say in my heart, you were as a lamb to my God. Well, you weren't to know, and it wasn't for you to know. All's well that ends well, I say. No matter, such details are trifling. We're fast friends by now. Let this express what words cannot. Oh, doubt me not, sweet compeer. What is friendship? My apologies, but I feel a profound thought occurring on the good grace of a certain god and the way he meted out his love. My apologies. That was uncharitably done.
Betrayed by something that initially claims to be for our own good, the parallels with the Healing Church's concealment of knowledge is obvious. It's here that we find some new clothes, the student uniform. Looking at the description, we see it states, Uniform of the Students of Byrgenwerth, a bygone institution of learning. Features a thick cape. The Healing Church has its roots in Byrgenwerth, and naturally borrows heavily from its uniform design. To focus not on knowledge or thought, but on pure pretension, would surely bring Master Willem to despair, if only he knew. Sounds like I need to rethink killing Master Willem. Sounds like he didn't like these poshos either. It's worth noting here how armour is treated in Bloodborne. Pretty much all of the garbs we find are lightweight with minor improvements for particular stats, but it's also worth noting that often the noble and high quality clothing we find, such as the student uniforms and the noble dress, don't offer much in the way of useful stats. However, some of the most powerful armour in the game is found at the halfway point, and I mean, look at it. These raggedy robes, the random piece of rope, the uneven shape, it looks clawed together, poorly made, inexpensive. Once again, Bloodborne conveys to the player that high value and monetary worth mean nothing in this world. It's the raggedy efforts of the common folk and the hunters. That's where the true strength lies. Because we're ballsy, we're not going to pursue Micolash just yet. We're going to head over to one of Bloodborne's most fascinating secrets, Forsaken Castle Cainhurst and the Vile Bloods. Our first reference to the Vile Bloods is to go back to Alfred, taking a brief respite near Cathedral Ward.
Ah, there's something I want to tell you. A bit of wisdom from the eminent master Logarius. Once, a scholar betrayed his fellows at Byrgenwerth and brought forbidden blood back with him to Cainhurst Castle. It was there that the first of the inhuman Vile Bloods was born. The Vile Bloods are fiendish creatures who threaten the purity of the Church's blood healing. The ruler of the Vile Bloods is still alive today. And so, to honor my master's wishes, I search for the path to Cainhurst Castle.
The Society of Cainhurst is on the surface what Yharnam is under a scratch of dirt. It relies on a hierarchical structure with servants, knights, nobles, and a monarchy, the Vile Bloods sitting nice and cosy at the top. When we arrive at Castle Cainhurst, we find it frozen in snow and time, giving the sense that this monarchy suitably is a relic of a distant past, despite existing alongside the rise and fall of Yharnam. Much of the armour sets, architecture and lore surrounding Cainhurst is reminiscent of Dark Souls. A magical crown, kings, immortal queens, a fantastical castle with tragic protectors, and exploring Castle Cainhurst gave me a similar feeling to exploring Anor Londo in Dark Souls 1. Tragically, many of the enemies we fight in Cainhurst are from the bottom rung of the societal ladder. As we enter the castle, we're met with two contrasting images: a sobbing servant desperately scrubbing the floor, and grandiose red carpets, a chandelier, and ominous looming statues. It only takes a few minutes before we're burying our weapon in these servants, forced to fight against the Vile Blood subjects, doomed to protect a queen who doesn't care about them. Similar to the blood-starved beast, Cainhurst's residents are desperate for a drop of blood to drink, but every drop they could harvest was passed to Queen Annalise. Unlike Yharnam's blood economy, where the people were tricked into funding a capitalist enterprise by the Healing Church, Cainhurst's economy is much simpler. 100% of the blood currency they had went to Annalise to fuel her desire to give birth to a blood child. Despite a massacre taking place within its walls, we don't see a drop of blood within the castle. There are a couple of interesting arguments out there as to why, most notably Critical Rant's claim that,
think back to what we witnessed at the start of the video. A servant scrubbing the floor to the point that it shone. And that's why I believe there isn't any blood in Cainhurst Castle, because the servants have scrubbed any and every trace of it away. Imagine being one of these servants, surviving the genocide of your people and spending years attempting to restore the castle, your home, to its former glory. All that time cleaning and scrubbing and trying to return things to the way they were, despite the fact that you will never achieve that. But what else would there have been to do?
He has some great videos, by the way. You should definitely check them out, and I'll link them below, even if I don't agree with him. See, I think there's a darker reason why there's no blood in the castle. Annalise has it. Don't forget, Annalise's ruthless demand that she is given every drop of blood which comes through. I find it much more likely that she's ordered the remnants of her servants to gather the blood from the walls and the floors and give it to her to drink. She's forcing her workers to literally give her the blood they already spilled for her. When we finally get to Annalise, we're met with easily one of the most unlikable characters in the game. We fought through hell to reach her. I struggle every time I come face to face with the boss guarding her door, Martyr Ligarius. When we finally do stand before her, coated in Ligarius' blood and freeing Cainhurst from his curse, does she thank us?
We shall not give audience to an ill-mannered beast. Get thee gone.
Hell no, though I was faced with one of the toughest choices in the game. To kneel, or not to kneel.
You can't tell me what to do. I'll break your statues. All of them.
Alright, with Ligarius slain and Castle Cainhurst conquered, let's abandon the monarchy and return to our main task, tracking down Micolash. He's hiding here somewhere. The first thing of note as we track through the Nightmare of Menzies is that this motif of creatures being clumsily meshed together has continued here as well. Dogs and crows have merged to make these horrible things. Ugh. It seems the snake parasite from the Forbidden Woods has infected some of the enemies patrolling the cliffs around the imposing castle waiting for us above. Statues have now lost all human form. They too have evolved into screaming stone maws, practically screaming, "Abandon hope, all ye who enter here." There's no greenery and no natural life. The Nightmare of Menzies is an apocalyptic wasteland, a sign of things to come as a result of the Healing Church's meddling. They've mined for valuable resources in the tombs below Byrgenwerth, and powerful forces beyond their control have now damned the masses. Those same masses who barely understood the science behind their own damnation. And then, as we take in the metallic, ebony castle above us, and swallow deeply, an orange light beams from the castle, and a little strange bar appears. Frenzy is Bloodborne's version of Dark Souls' infamous curse mechanics. However, whilst both are rightfully despised by the community, I find it hard to be upset whenever Frenzy kills me. Perhaps it might be because by this, my 7th playthrough, I fully understand the mechanics and how to reduce its effect, but I also think it's because I, reluctantly, appreciate how Frenzy works as a thematic device. It's been said before by better critics than me, but it is worth casting our minds back to Lovecraft and his exploration of madness. Remember that often his protagonists, intellectual, wealthy academics, would lose their minds as his stories went on. Indeed, in The Call of Cthulhu, one of Lovecraft's more famous novels, his main character, Francis Thurston, loses his mask of sanity and descends into paranoia despite surviving his voyage from Dunedin. Just a quick reminder that Lovecraft described a bunch of New Zealanders as, quote, half-castes and queer-looking folk in this story. It doesn't pull away from the impact of the story, but still, yuck. With Lovecraft's influences in mind, I see Bloodborne as one of the most impressive examples of gamifying insanity ever. It just overtakes Amnesia: The Dark Descent for me, purely because of how engaging managing insight is. Insight is essentially an indicator of how learned we are, how much knowledge we've gathered about the crazy goings-on in Yharnam. As we're constantly reminded by player messages throughout our journey, you're in the know, right? Bumping up our insight is useful in that it allows us to purchase certain items, summon NPCs, and interact with the game's online features. Particularly, these online features are interesting. Almost by increasing our insight, we can see into other planes, other worlds, where other players are on their own quests. Of course, as a downside, it also makes Frenzy an absolute bitch. The higher our insight, the faster our frenzy meter fills. In essence, if we didn't understand what was happening, if we lived just like the common folk, the proletariat, our lives would be so much easier as we stumble through the Nightmare of Menzies to reach Micolash. Speaking of which, let's get to him, shall we?
Cause. Or some say cosm. Do you hear our prayers? No, we shall not abandon the dream. No one can catch us. No one can stop us now.
Micolash is a villain which sits at polar opposites of the boss spectrum for me. The actual fight with him isn't particularly interesting. He has like 3 moves: Squid Attack, Arcane Ruins Your Day, and slapping you.
Smithers, make me slap him. You call that a slap?
But God, I adore this fight. I love chasing him through his gloomy library, the wall-lined eyeballs watching you between texts on the arcane arts and the great ones.
Who even wrote these?
I love him playing Puppet Master with corpses of his servants, students, and victims who were brought here to experiment on, showing that he has complete control over this domain, and it's a cautious warning of what he's going to do to you if you die here. He even occasionally howls like a wolf at the moon. But most of all, I love his ramblings.
Oh, majestic! A hunter is a hunter, even in a dream. But alas, not too fast. Nightmares, worlds, chains, unending.
He's mocking and patronising as we hunt him down. His rants get in the way while we try to pick up items. Think about his word choice. He begs the Great Ones to cleanse us of our beastly idiocy. He sees the uneducated masses of Yharnam as beastly idiots, worth less than dirt, fit only to be his puppets and test subjects in his quest to become like the Great Ones, a god. His wearing of the Menzies cage brings him closer to the Great Ones, but it's also another example of the motif of locking away knowledge, something we have seen so often up until this point. Even working our way through the castle, we find huge cages full of books to plant this thematic seed before we even reach him. Just like the other elitists we slain prior, Micolash kept his high status by concealing knowledge from the people of Yharnam. But too bad for him, we've cut him down. Before we move on, we've got to talk about the Old Hunters DLC. First of all, this is a substantial package for the £15 it was sold as at release. It carries 5 bosses, well, 4.5, and 3 fleshed out areas. As we're grabbed by a lesser amygdala in Cathedral Ward, we hear the phrase,
"Curse the fiends, their children too. And their children forever true."
We are tossed straight into the Hunter's Nightmare, a realm where hunters reside after death, cursed forever to fight beasts and relive their sins. It also immortalizes the past, a specific time period dating back to the beginning of the Healing Church when Laurence, Willem, and Gurman all worked together. It's here that we'll see the secret sins of the Healing Church, an act of domestic terrorism so great that everything we've seen so far will pale in comparison. The DLC eases us in nicely, planting us in the same spot where we were captured by the lesser amygdala. Our job is a simple one, just work our way up to where the church is again. Easy, we've done this before. Oh. The first thing to note is that we are fighting hunters in their prime within the dream, a time when hunters were at the full height of their skills. These hunters we battle don't belong to Gurman, but Ludwig. This is the time when the first hunts with a capital H were decreed by Laurence. Ludwig and his hunters armed themselves and took to the streets to slay the beastly scourge which ran amok in Yharnam streets. These are tough fights, just like fighting other hunters in the waking world. Bloodborne expects you to be at the top of your game to beat its DLC. Often, you won't fight hunters alone. They're part of mobs now, accompanied by dogs which look like German hounds, Doberman pincers to be specific. It's worth noting that the Yharnam hunter garb reads, Ludwig, the first hunter of the Healing Church, once recruited Yharnamites to serve as hunters. This attire was made for new recruits and has excellent straightforward defense, but not nearly enough to allow an ordinary man to stand any real chance against the beasts. Ludwig, in an effort to recruit more hunters, formed a people's militia of the Healing Church. He convinced the common folk that it was their responsibility to arm themselves and fight for what made Yharnam great.
I'm Sheriff David Clark, and I want to talk to you about something personal, your safety. It's no longer a spectator sport. I need you in the game. But are you ready? With officers laid off and furloughed, simply calling 911 and waiting is no longer your best option. You could beg for mercy from a violent criminal, hide under the bed, or you can fight back. But are you prepared? Consider taking a certified safety course in handling a firearm so you can defend yourself until we get there. You have a duty to protect yourself and your family. We're partners now. Can I count on you?
Anyway, we'll talk about Ludwig later. For now, turning a corner, we find our first NPC of the DLC, Simon the Harrow.
You're a hunter with your sanity, aren't you? Must have taken a wrong turn then, eh? Well, we're more alike than you think. This is the hunter's nightmare, where hunters end up when drunk with blood. You've seen them before. Aimless, wandering hunters slavering like beasts. This is what the poor fools have to look forward to. So, don't be brash. Turn back before it's too late. Unless you've something of an interest in nightmares. Oh yes, I see. You sense a secret within the nightmare, and cannot bear to leave it be. As if the spirit of Byrgenwerth lives on within you. Such inquisitive hunters will relish the nightmare. But beware. Secrets are secrets for a reason, and some do not wish to see them uncovered. Especially when the secrets are particularly unseemly. Beware. Secrets are secrets for a reason.
He's a hunter of the church who would disguise himself, hiding among the dregs of society, the poor folk, and snitch on them to the healing church when they showed early signs of beasthood. He's a dick, but he tells us something really interesting here. This hunter's nightmare we're in hides a dark and terrible secret. As we travel by him, we finally come upon Ludwig, the Holy Blade. Remember that secret police we discussed back with Gascoigne? Ludwig was their leader. He's lost himself to beasthood. He's monstrous, and possibly my favourite boss fight in the game. The way that this fierce monster transforms into his former greatness as a hunter always gives me a real giggle. The Moonlight Blade reminds him of the skilled warrior he once was, meaning that the hunters we've battled in an effort to reach him condition us to be ready for this, the most difficult part of the fight, when he transforms from Ludwig the Accursed to Ludwig the Holy Blade. We fight in a pit of corpses, a reminder of the many beasts and people that he's slain during the hunts. It isn't until halfway through the fight that he turns to his Moonlight Sword, the arcane weapon which spoke its secrets to him on the nights of the hunt.
All along. My true mentor, my guiding moonlight.
Well, regardless of his Moonlight Sword, we slaughtered him. Sorry, Ludwig. That's the second general of the church we've slain. Let's jog on to the Research Hall. Reaching the Research Hall does make us consider if this is the dark secret Simon spoke of earlier. On a first playthrough, we're so young and so naive, but even so, the Research Hall does show us what Maria's role in the healing church ultimately was. This is where she spent the last of her days. I love the Research Hall. I would go so far as to say it's my favourite level in Bloodborne. As we travel upwards in the elevator with those creepy ritualistic statues, it's clear that this is a part of Yharnam the healing church was determined to keep from the common folk. I find that the three statues are damning in who's to blame for the rest of the DLC's events. We have in the centre a provost-like figure, Willem, a figure reading a ritualistic passage, Laurence, and a figure ringing a bell, not unlike the hunter's bells we've used, Gehrman. Entering the research hall always fills me with chills. We have the patients with their swollen heads filled with brain fluid, wandering aimlessly about the main hall. This area is simply one big puzzle. We have to climb to the top, avoiding hunters, the brain fluid patients, and these rickety beams. Normally, I despise platforming in FromSoftware games, but there's something about how much you need to really think about your path from the bottom to the top, which makes this complicated climb much more satisfying. One of the bosses we fight here is the Living Failures, which is clearly an early attempt at creating the celestial emissaries which we find in present day. There's not much to say about this fight. It's a copy-paste of the battle we have in the main game with the celestial emissary boss. Except, at least in that battle, one's eaten his veggies and is a big boy. Once we defeat them and reach the top, we find Simon again, who tells us,
"Oh, hello. Not a pretty sight, is it? The true face of the blood-worshipping, beast-purging, healing church. But that's not all. You seek the secrets held by the nightmare, do you not? Then here's what you must do. Climb the astral clock tower and kill Maria. She hides the real secret."
Beyond this door is the keeper of the research hall, Maria. She was once Gehrman's prime pupil, but after the events of the fishing hamlet, which we'll get to next, she laid down her blade and resigned herself to caring for the patients we've marched through on our way to her. Here, in the research hall, she oversaw the experimentation on the Yharnam poor under the church's orders. I can almost imagine, tragically, Gehrman appearing at her doorstep with another batch of sick common folk for their research, probably the only time they saw each other after she gave up the hunt. Maria is a tough fight. I would go so far as to say that she is our ultimate test of skill, overtaking Gehrman in how difficult this boss is. Entering her arena, we find her corpse. Next to her on a table is a goblet and a picture, most likely of her and Gehrman. Be it from poison or, as is more widely theorized, slitting her throat from guilt, it's clear she committed suicide. Interacting with her corpse, she says,
A corpse should be left well alone. Oh, I know very well how the secrets beckon so sweetly. Only an honest death will kill you now. From your wild curiosity.
The greatest challenge with Maria is she's fast. She hits hard, and her arena isn't quite big enough to fully escape her attacks. We have to pull from our knowledge of Gascoigne's fight. We need to be aggressive, learning when to parry and when to avoid her. She uses visceral blood attacks halfway through our battle, highlighting how much she clearly partook of the Great One's blood back when she was Gehrman's right hand. It took me easily 24 attempts to take her out to my first playthrough, and on consecutive attempts, her challenge doesn't ease for me. With her out of the way, it's time to step 1 year further into the past. Travelling through the window of the Astral Clock Tower, we come upon the Fishing Hamlet, the dark secret of the Healing Church. It soon becomes clear that we've worked our way backwards through time. We saw one of the first hunts, led by Ludwig. We jumped back a year or so to see Maria overseeing the research hall, and now we see where it all began, the fishing hamlet. We see why Maria gave up her blade, why the hunter's dream exists, and where the Healing Church's corruption spawned from. This creature stumbles out of the fishing hamlet and curses the Byrgenwerth scholars for what happened here.
By the wrath of Mother Goss. Mercy for the poor innocent child. Mercy. Oh, please.
Remember, at this time, Byrgenwerth was made up of Willem, Laurence, Micolash, Gehrman, and Maria. Whatever they did here has haunted our Healing Church, and in the waking world, they haven't formally paid for their crimes. The fishing hamlet is a really unique area for FromSoftware to have designed. Up until now we've covered creepy woods, rundown villages, cityscapes, etc., but the fishing hamlet sticks with me. It's reminiscent of Lovecraft's Shadow over Innsmouth. Strange fish-like creatures roam the streets, not attacking you out of madness, but out of protection for what waits at the end. We see strung-up bodies, creatures hacked to pieces, and what happened here does become clear. Under orders from Laurence and Willem, Maria and Gurman led a band of hunters to the fishing hamlet and massacred the small village, an act of domestic terrorism ordered for by the Byrgenwerth elite. They massacred the people in order to reach the corpse of Cos, which had washed up on the shore. The scholars were desperate to finally find a Great One and harnessed its power, and they killed the Yharnam common folk in an effort to access it. The image for the accursed skull is butchered, there are holes gouged out of it. Gurman and Maria didn't just massacre this small impoverished whaling town, they mutilated the residents in an effort to find if their brains had indeed been aligned with eyes. The enemies are tricky and vicious. I think everyone who's faced off against the giant fishmen when tumbling down the well have left battered and bruised. Just look at Vatavidia's experience here.
You start fighting one of the fish trolls and, you convince yourself that other one on the roof isn't going to come attack me. That's not going to happen. And then you're about to win and you're like, hang on, what's that noise? God damn it. One of these things was tough enough, but two? I ran away and I got up the ladder just in time and I was going to plan my next attack, and then I fell in.
We cross Simon on our way through as well, now dying in a dishevelled hut. He tells us that this is what always happens. Hunters die over and over and over again. This is our metagame answer to why we respawn into the waking world. It's absolutely genius. The Hunter's Dream, where we level up, buy items and fast travel, is a similar realm to the levels we've travelled through in the Hunter's Nightmare. We are a hunter, so we too must die over and over again just to be transported to the Hunter's Dream after death. We're lucky, we're blessed. Under Gurman's care, we aren't thrown into the Hunter's Nightmare when we die. Instead, we just pop up in the Hunter's Dream, nursing our wounds before launching back into the hunt. Other hunters, such as the ones we've battled in our quest, aren't so lucky. Simon asks a more provocative question to us.
So our forefathers sinned. We hunters cannot bear their weight forever. It isn't fair. It just isn't fair.
It's not a question for me to answer. This isn't supposed to be a lesson on morality and ethics, but there are real-world examples we can compare it to. Think of the Black Lives Matter movement. Think of recompense for slavery. For the Fishing Hamlet massacre, the survivors cursed the hunters, Gurman and Maria, and their children too, any hunters who have followed in their footsteps. This means Simon. Simon must have died in the waking world, and he woke up here to be tortured for all eternity to pay for the sins of the healing church. This does relate strongly to the straw man argument we constantly see of the Black Lives Matter movement.
Black Lives Matter. As soon as I thought you couldn't get any dumber, you totally redeem yourself. Little and get they ass fired. How about get their ass fired? Let me see if I got this right. White people that never owned slaves need to give black people that never were slaves all of their stuff. Are you telling me that you are incapable of achieving your own economic growth, so you need us to give it to you?
Now, this is total crap. Adam Calhoun is using a strawman argument to diminish what the BLM movement is in fact fighting for. You know you've lost the argument when you need to critique someone's grammar. I mean, this guy. No black person wants to punish present-day white people for slave trading in the past. But in the world of Bloodborne, this is the case in the fishing hamlet. No wonder they were angry. They watched an elite congregation kill their friends. But future hunters are now paying the price. Is this just? Well, in the case of Simon, I would go so far as to say yes. Simon sucks. Don't forget, he worked undercover for the church. He ratted out the people of Yharnam who would potentially turn into beasts. Also, don't forget, the only reason the people of Yharnam fell to this scourge is because of the Healing Church, the very government which Simon works for. The issue, however, and the issue which Bloodborne draws our attention to with Simon's dying breath, is that cursing the hunters is operating on a symptom of the problem, not the source. The source is the Healing Church. As hunters in the modern day, in our own playthrough, we are unwittingly doing the Healing Church's bidding by slaying beasts. The hunters aren't fully to blame for the fishing hamlet massacre. I would argue that the wrong people were blamed. We see this simply by how hidden away the fishing hamlet is in the DLC. It's the last area. We've had to battle through Maria, Ludwig, and the Celestial Emissaries just to get here. The standard enemies leading to here have been no cakewalk either. This is a secret which we hear no reference to in the waking world. The Healing Church clearly took action to cover it up. Think of the fishing hamlet massacre as Russian collusion, Pizzagate if you believe that, or if you want a more concrete example, the war crimes committed in, say, Vietnam, which the US government tried to hide from the people. Finding the body of Mother Kos, everything becomes clear. Kos...
Some say Cosm.
Yeah, we get it. Kos's body washed up on the shore of the fishing hamlet, and through communion with the locals, became pregnant with the orphan of Kos. You may have noticed a trend with the DLC, but the orphan is also a tough boss fight. Just like Maria, he's fast and hits hard. He has a second stage, which is hard enough to get to, and I witnessed a friend of mine rage quit the DLC after dying to him for the 30th time, just moving straight on to Gehrman and finishing it there. Fascinatingly, Jackson Trails has a theory that the Orphan of Kos is Gehrman's child after he laid with Kos, but I'm just not convinced. There's no evidence which highlights Gehrman copulated with Kos at any point, and they get of themselves much too quickly.
At some point, Gehrman began sleeping with Kos, and it is possible that the half-woman creatures we see are in fact his daughters. Around the same time that he had impregnated Kos with the orphan, his masters at Byrgenwerth found out the truth, and decided that the best course of action, if they wished to experiment on these strange denizens within the fishing hamlet, was to turn Gehrman to their cause.
What we do know is that Kos's body and the child which would soon be born from her corpse were the reasons Gehrman and Maria, under orders from Laurence and Willem, violated the fishing hamlet. They went there to ensure this great one was dead and to transport the corpse back to Byrgenwerth for the scholars to study. An act of domestic terrorism by the Elitists and their secret police. Okay, let's finally talk about Laurence. Bloodborne has a lot of enemies for you to slay, but I would go so far as to say that Laurence is Bloodborne's villain.
Master Willem, I've come to bid you farewell.
Oh, I know. You think now to betray me.
No, but you will never listen. I tell you, I will not forget our adage.
We are born of the blood, made men by the blood, undone by the blood. Our eyes are yet to open.
Fear the old blood.
Mitch L. did an awesome video on why he sees Laurence's story to be a tragic one. He's a much stronger lore digger than I am, and I've linked his video below if you want to check it out, but I have to disagree with his assessment. Everything goes back to Laurence. He took some of the blood from Willem and went on to forge his own path. He founded the Healing Church. He convinced his followers to mass-produce the Great One's blood, diluting it with humans, and even though he didn't realise it, he was the cause of the Blood Plague. The Healing Church's iron grip on Yharnam stems from him. Amazing as the Old Hunters DLC is, I find it extremely strange that Laurence, as a boss, wasn't in the original game. And even then, he's an optional boss in the DLC, despite being so intrinsic to Bloodborne's story. Everything wrong with the Healing Church can be traced back to Laurence. I'd go so far as to say that if Bloodborne is making a point about a corrupt, elitist governing body ruining the lives of the common folk, Laurence is the Donald Trump or Boris Johnson of the story. Yeah, I know, but stick with me on this. Let's look at Laurence's story. When Laurence and Willem found the old blood at Byrgenwerth, they had a disagreement. Willem distrusted the blood, believing injecting it or ingesting it wasn't the way to elevate their knowledge. Laurence, being arrogant and strong-headed, wanted to use the blood and spread it. He first passed some to Castle Cainhurst, and then went to the people of Yharnam. He left with a team who agreed with him, such as Micolash, and established the Healing Church in Yharnam Central. The people of Yharnam were distrustful at first, but over time Laurence and his scholars started selling the blood as a cure-all in small clinics around the city. There isn't a single mention of a governmental body in Yharnam throughout the game. The Healing Church are the ones in charge, a corrupt, authoritarian regime which spread propaganda throughout the city. Think of how brainwashed and God-fearing the people of Yharnam sound when you speak to them about the church.
Praise you. Praise the old damn church. And then the best of luck hunting. Best luck of all.
There are two interpretations we can take from this. The first is that the people are praising the church out of fear. After all, we're a hunter, out on the night of the hunt, knocking on the common folk's door. They'd be terrified.
My precious little baby! Stay away! Stay away from us!
The second interpretation is that even though they have sold these people the literal apocalypse, and then lied and killed people to cover their tracks, the common folk of Yharnam still believe the Healing Church is looking out for their best interests. Sound familiar? As news of the Blood Plague spread to the Healing Church, they established the hunters to slay these beasts. Rather than pouring any work or effort into trying to find a cure, they went for the easy option, a cull. Laurence ordered the burning of Old Yharnam, and watched from his ivory tower as the poorest members of the city cried out for help. He ignored their cries. The hunters donned their black cloaks, and every hunt they would kill anyone on the streets, whether they were beast or not, continuing to keep the people of Yharnam living in fear. He continued to partake in the blood, and ultimately cause one of the Great Ones trapped him in the hunter's nightmare to pay for his sins. When we enter the hunter's nightmare, our hunter finds Laurence has now turned into a cleric beast, perpetually burning, but not knowing why. We cut this callous, ambitious, aristocratic, entitled piece of shit to pieces, and absorb his blood echoes. In other words, we eat the rich. I know that Murgo is close, but let's take a few steps back and head to the upper cathedral ward before we take on his wet nurse. Before we even conclude, we have to talk about the choir. You didn't think I was going to forget about these guys, did you? Well, I did, which is pretty appropriate because of how secretive the choir is, working in the background but being so important to Bloodborne's story. In fact, it wasn't until Redgrave's incredible essay, The Pale Blood Hunt, which I'll also link below, that I even realised just how important the choir were to the game's political narrative. Let's briefly recap. Everything began with Byrgenwerth. Willem, Laurence, Gehrman, Micolash, and Maria uncovered the blood of the Great Ones in tombs below the school. Willem was cautious of using the blood, but the others disagreed, abandoning him to establish the Healing Church. Time passed and we had three factions ruling Yharnam. Willem at Byrgenwerth, Micolash at the School of Menzies, and Laurence leading the Healing Church. Gehrman and his hunters continued to work for the Healing Church as their secret police. Maria, laying down her blade, was assigned to the research hall, where she oversaw the experiments there. Time passed. More scholars left Willem. Old Yharnam was burned down. Maria committed suicide. Gehrman was lost to the hunter's dream, and Micolash, well, he hid the School of Menzies in a nightmare. Laurence fell to madness, losing his authoritative grip over Yharnam. This is when a secret cabal of the church formed the Choir, the church elite who became the de facto rulers of Yharnam. They were the men behind the chair. Think of Jafar in Aladdin, operating in the shadows but ruling the land. To steal from Redgrave, he writes, "It is uncertain exactly how much of the church's religion was merely used as a figurehead. It's not clear if the choir truly believed that the Great Ones were gods, or if they simply used that as a way to legitimize their research." The choir weren't particularly interested in ruling over Yharnam. They were more focused on their research, but they certainly reaped the embroidered benefits that came with their mantle, and they definitely had zero regard for the common folk. If we transported some choir members into the real world, I firmly believe they'd be pouncing around, spouting lines from The Bell Curve at passers-by. For reference, The Bell Curve was a conservative political book which pretended to be a scientific examination of intelligence, class, and race. Instead, it's actually a doctrine on genetic and biological inferiority in certain races and classes. What I'm saying is, there's a solid chance that Yosefka, or at least her imposter, was a eugenicist. The level design of the Upper Cathedral Ward reinforces this. We are literally standing in the upper levels of the church, where the choir resided in the church's hierarchy. As we explore, finally coming upon the orphanage, which was once Maria's research hall, we also see why there have been so many empty prams lining the streets of Yharnam. The choir are the cruelest monsters of all. They hadn't just been abducting the poor and experimenting on them like the church once did in times past. They had started to abduct children. We find child-sized coffins as we cautiously step through the darkness. I theorize that this is to sustain the Great One the choir was operating with, Elitest, daughter of the cosmos. And it seems we should have heeded the words of the suspicious beggar earlier on. Because the alien-like creatures we hacked through by taking a wrong turn in the Forbidden Woods are in fact the result of these experiments on children, the celestial emissaries. Just imagine it. In the dead of night, there's an ominous knock at your door. An imposing figure pushes his way in and steals your child from you, transporting them miles away from their parents to be locked in a cage and abused. Sure glad that doesn't happen anymore, right? The Celestial Emissaries isn't a particularly interesting boss fight. We're just hacking through enemies we've already fought a few times over the course of the main game. Just like when fighting the living failures in the DLC, the guilt of what you're doing, what you've become, is the best thing it brings to the table. But defeating the Celestial Emissaries does reward us with a secret path to, arguably, the most secretive boss of the game, Elitest. Elitest reminds me a lot of Seath the Scales from Dark Souls 1. This sludging mass of tentacles takes up just too much of the camera when trying to work around her. Though, at least here, we don't need to deal with this ridiculous curse attack. I've played Dark Souls 1 almost as many times as the first game, and I still just lumber myself with Havel's armor for the curse resistance before facing off against him. I often leave Elitest until the end of the game, so I'm fully geared up before reaching her. So she's never too much of an issue, but the only thing worth noting here really is, if you're locked on, your whole day is going to be ruined by her massive size. Too many times did I lose my player character trying to navigate her. The choir formed the Elitist's elite, operating in secret, the highest echelons of Yharnam's government, making secret deals to receive their test subjects, operating with the Great One unbeknownst to Laurence or even Willem. It might just be this new brand of deodorant, but smells like Illuminati to me. What is a god? Is he a god? He's praised like one. Is this a god? He has powers like one. The Great Ones are considered gods in Bloodborne's universe, but just like Gwyn and his like in Dark Souls, they're not necessarily the gods of this world like the Judeo-Christian definition we'd understand in the West. To use the wiki as our reference, the Great Ones are extremely powerful, multi-dimensional beings that can exist across several planes of existence. They have often been described as gods. They're not omniscient, omnipotent, or omnipresent, though in the case of the moon presence this could be debated. They're extremely powerful, but ultimately Bloodborne's gods are just that, beings of great power. They bleed. In fact, they bleed red, just like humans and beasts. Which is truly important because, remember, blood is our currency in this game. Defeating even a lesser Great One provides us with a large number of blood echoes to help us grow more powerful. Throughout the course of the game, we face off against a whole array of beasts and godlike beings, but it's important that we examine the Great Ones a little further. See, the Great Ones can be separated into two separate camps, kin and true Great Ones. Kin are humans who have been blessed by true Great Ones and ascended, evolved into something beyond humanity. They do not bleed red, but a yellowish pale fluid, But hey, it's still blood, so we can use it to level up. Rom, Amygdala, and Ebrietas are just 3 examples of the kin we battle in the game. True Great Ones are the real godlike beings of Bloodborne. We can tell we've slain one when the screen text shows up with those fateful words, Nightmare Slain. And in fact, we only really fight 2 of them in the base game. Well, 1.5. We've heard the true Great One Murgo for almost the whole game. A baby's cries echo in the background as we explore the nightmares of Yharnam, urged on by strange messages to find her and slay her. When we arrive at the top of Murgo's loft, we see Queen Yharnam watching over her child, but just out of arm's reach. However, the reason why I said we fought half of a true Great One is because we don't fight Murgo. As the boss title says, we fight her wet nurse, a shadowy, terrifying creature that provides one hell of an end section boss fight. It doesn't matter how many times I've played Bloodborne, I find the wet nurse difficult to read. Every time the battle comes to a brutal and bloody end and I wait for Murgo's cries to die away, I feel like I've made it by the skin of my teeth. I adore the wet nurse's design, many-limbed like Amygdala, and clad in a black robe like the Grim Reaper, creating an evocative juxtaposition with its responsibility to nurse a life into the world. As the wet nurse is cut down, there's a long pause. I remember watching my friend finish the boss fight, and when 2 beats passed and no text flashed up on the screen, he uttered, "Oh God, what now?" his hands tightening on the controller. But, of course, as the wet nurse dies, so does Murgo's link to life, and eventually this new red text pops up on screen. Like I said, we only fought half of a true Great One. We didn't really test our skills against a god. We've done a lot in this game, but we haven't truly killed God. Not yet. Finally fighting and slaying the Moon Presence, a true Great One, is supposed to be an ultimate test of our skills by the end of the game. It's watched our every move, a great glowing orb in the sky, taking interest in us as we've slain beasts and eaten the rich, growing larger and coming closer as we continue to pique its curiosity. It's a shame then that for most of us, the Moon Presence won't be as challenging as, say, Murgo's wet nurse, or even the blood-starved beast, or, hell, even Gehrman. By the time we face off against its tentacle-clad, Cthulhu-esque form, we're simply too powerful. We've gorged ourselves on the blood economy. Despite the efforts of Willem, Laurence, and Micolash, none of them truly ascend to become Great Ones. We've either killed them before they get to that point, or, in the case of Laurence, they've transformed into a beast and been locked away in another realm. But, make no mistake, this creature gliding down to us is their goal. They want this untapped power that the Great Ones represent. They want to ascend from the common folk. For the purposes of Bloodborne's politics, the god we kill is more of an idea than a physical thing. Even in our world, the kill God philosophy doesn't mean to kill, say, Jesus or Yahweh. It means killing hierarchical structures, that no man is greater than another. Screw Micolash's quest for control over others. What makes him so special? His high social status? His knowledge that he's hidden from the common folk? Why does he deserve to have a grander status than us, a common hunter? Killing God is about killing inequality in all of its forms, killing the concept of putting people on a pedestal. And just to hammer that point home, we murder the Moon Presence, and its control over the people of Yharnam is removed. But here's the stinger that Bloodborne throws in with its true ending. By eating 3 umbilical cords and defeating the Moon Presence, we transform into this slug-like creature. We have in fact achieved what Micolash and the others wanted. We've become a Great One. It's impossible to truly kill God because something else will always take its place.
Joe Biden's policies put China first and America last. And that's what he'll continue to do if he ever got the shot. And you will have a disruption in the markets, the likes of which our country has never seen. You will have a crash in the markets because he's going to double and triple your taxes. He's going to do things that nobody ever would ever think even possible because he's following the radical left agenda. Take away your guns, destroy your Second Amendment, No religion, no anything. Hurt the Bible, hurt God. He's against God, he's against guns. He's against energy, our kind of energy. I don't think he's going to do too well in Ohio.
It's going to be a very, very, very long time before Bloodborne is knocked out of my personal top 10 games list. Like I said at the start of this video, the joy of FromSoftware games, for me, is building your own interpretation of the worlds they provide us. It wasn't until my third playthrough that I even started to notice some of the politics of Bloodborne, and with each new playthrough, I find something new every time. At its heart, this is a game about killing monsters, and yes, Lovecraftian horror that'll make you lie awake at night. But wiping some of the dust away from its surface level joy, you might find a new reason to say, hate a character, or sympathise with another. I know that after writing 15,000 odd words on the subject, every time I go toe to toe with this, or this, I'll find some renewed vigour to take them down before moving on to my next task, eating the rich and killing God. Hey, thanks for watching. If you like this, hit that subscribe button for more. Something I'd love to see is comments telling me why you agree or disagree with me, so don't be afraid to tell me what you think. See you next time.